Hey, welcome to Living the Dream with MS. So, there are some topics that I probably just was not going to talk about because they're uncomfortable or even embarrassing. Today's topic was one of those, but I got a direct message from somebody on one of the blog that I talked about last week, and it was a more positive feedback, and it was a request to cover a topic, basically so that the person didn't feel alone, because a lot of us don't talk about this particular topic. And it touched me enough that I felt like I should talk about it. So here we go. Um, nerve issues cause muscle weakness, and they cause sensation issues. So one of the major places that it manifests itself for a lot of people with MS is the bowel and the bladder. So yeah, obviously super uncomfortable, a little embarrassing to talk about. I'm going to talk about three areas that it affects. So with the bladder, the big issue is with the sensation issue, not knowing when you're empty. That's the best of them. I'm going to try to be as clinical and not gross as possible, but you don't know when you're done. So you'll think you're done, and then a little while later, all of a sudden, it feels like an emergency again, and so you got to go. The second part to that is the muscle control issue, and that you have to be able to hope that you can keep things together until you get to an area where it's appropriate to go. So that's one thing. Now, with the with the bowel, you have the similar issues. Number one, you don't know when you're empty. And number two, once you realize that you're full, it's generally an emergency. I equate it to if you think about somebody who's just finished potty training. Again, real dignified to draw that parallel, but it is what it is. And kids will ignore it, and then all of a sudden it's an emergency. Well, the same thing happens with MS, except it's not that you're ignoring it. Your brain's not getting the signal that you would normally get to tell you that, yep, you've got to go. Yeah, you've got to go. All right, you should probably go soon. You only get the signal of, you've got to go right now. And then again, tie in the muscle control issue. And not only do you have to go right now, but your body may betray you if you don't go right now. I'm embarrassed to say, but it is what it is. I've had both emergencies and I've had both accidents. I have friends that are later stages of MS that actually have to wear Depends. I don't have to do that. I've come up with some tricks of the trade, so to speak, and that's something I'll talk about in a minute. The third part, and this was very scary for me, and I found out later that a lot of people go through it, is bleeding. So with that poor sensation, I was bleeding and thought maybe I had cancer or, something less serious but more gross like hemorrhoids or whatever. But what we ultimately found out is that because of the lack of sensitivity, I was wiping too hard. So embarrassing to say, so gross, but it is what it is. And it was doing damage and making me bleed. And I found out that this is very, very common because of the lack of sensitivity. So those are the things. So if you have MS, you are not alone. A lot of us deal with it. If you're supporting somebody with MS who's constantly racing out of a room or, white knuckling in the car to get to a gas station, that's what it's all about. It's not that we didn't go before we had to leave or anything like that. It's part of the disease that's very difficult to control. So how do I manage it? Well, a doctor told me in the beginning for the bowel and the bladder that the most basic thing to do is basically go once an hour. That way you can try to keep your levels of whatever you're carrying around low or empty, and you'll have less urgency issues. As a life skill, I also am always aware of where facilities are and their cleanliness level, because there's a good chance that at some point I'm going to need them. Flying, as I did a couple of weeks ago, is always harrowing. You've got 2 bathrooms on an airplane, and generally they end up occupied. Not to mention the fact that at my size, airplane bathrooms are not exactly something that can be used all the time. So, in the grand scheme of things, things are okay. It's something that happens, and hopefully it helps some people that have the disease understand that it's not unusual and that a lot of us deal with it. Hopefully the people that support people with the disease now have another outlook on, like I said, why people race around like crazy people like they're 4 years old again, having to go to the bathroom. What I'm most thankful for is I have this outlet. I'm honored that somebody reached out to me and felt like my platform was a good one to share this with, so that people would understand they weren't alone. And that's what I'm going to take away from this week, and that's why I'll keep living the dream with MS.